A small act of kindness. The diner's bell jingled softly as the evening crowd began to settle. The warm glow of the neon sign outside flickered against the window, casting a soft hue over the worn-out leather booths and the polished counter. It was another long shift at Millie's Diner, the kind of place where locals and travelers alike stopped for a hot meal and a kind smile. Molly Carter wiped her damp hands on the apron tied around her waist, her feet aching from hours of rushing between tables. She had been working at Millie's for 3 years now, balancing her job, motherhood, and a never-ending pile of bills that always seemed to outpace her paychecks. She was used to exhaustion, used to the struggle, used to going without so her 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, could have a little more. But no matter how tired she was, she always smiled. That was the rule she lived by. As she gathered plates from a table, the bell jingled again, signaling another customer. Molly turned her head and saw a family of 4 shuffle inside. The father was tall but thin, his clothes neat but clearly worn from time. The mother's coat had a small tear on the sleeve, her eyes weary but gentle. Their 2 children, a little girl no older than 10 and a boy around 5, clutched their parents' hands, their eyes flickering with hunger as they scanned the room. Molly had seen this before, families stretching every last dollar, trying to give their children a sense of normalcy despite the weight of their struggles. Still, she greeted them like any other customer, her voice warm and welcoming. "Hi there, just the 4 of you tonight." The father hesitated, his hand hovering near his pocket. The mother, however, smiled quickly and answered, "Yes, please. A booth, if you have one." Molly nodded and led them to a corner booth by the window where they could have a little privacy. As she handed them menus, she noticed the tension between the parents, the quick glances, the soft whispers. She could almost hear their thoughts. "How much can we afford? Maybe we can share a meal. The kids need to eat more than we do." Molly had been there. She had lived that. "I'll give you a few minutes to decide," she said gently before walking away. But even as she busied herself at the counter, she couldn't help but overhear the whispered conversation. "Just one meal. We can share. The kids won't notice." Her heart ached. As she turned back toward their table, she caught sight of another customer. A man sat alone at the back of the diner, dressed in a navy blue suit, his presence out of place in their small-town setting. His neatly combed dark hair and polished wristwatch suggested wealth, but what caught Molly's attention was the way he was watching the family. Not in a rude way. More like curiosity. Like he had noticed what she had noticed. Pushing the thought aside, Molly approached the family's table again. "Have you decided?" she asked kindly. The mother hesitated, her fingers gripping the menu tightly. "Just 2 grilled cheese sandwiches," she said quietly. "We'll share." Molly's heart clenched. For a moment, she considered walking away and letting them be. It wasn't her place after all. But then she thought of Sophie. She thought of the nights she had gone to bed hungry so her daughter could eat. She thought of the strangers who had walked past her when she had needed kindness the most. And suddenly, she knew exactly what she had to do. "Actually," Molly said, her smile widening, "tonight's special is on me. Burgers, fries, milkshakes, the works. How about that?" The mother's eyes widened. "Oh no, we couldn't." "I insist," Molly interrupted gently. "It's my treat." The father's jaw tensed, his pride clearly wrestling with his gratitude. "Are you sure?" he asked hesitantly. Molly waved him off. "You don't need to pay me back," she said softly. "Just let the kids enjoy their meal, okay?" The mother blinked back tears. Her husband gave a shaky nod. The children, still unaware of what had just happened, bounced excitedly as they pointed to their favorite meals. "Thank you," the mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Molly only smiled and walked away, placing the order herself to ensure it would be made extra special. But what she didn't realize was that the man in the suit had seen everything. A stranger's interest. The diner hummed with the usual evening buzz, chatter from the booths, the clinking of dishes, and the faint hum of the radio playing an old country song in the background. But Molly's mind was elsewhere. She had just done something that would cost her. The meal she had paid for wasn't cheap. It meant skipping breakfast tomorrow or stretching a box of pasta for dinner. But it didn't matter. She couldn't watch those kids go hungry. As she turned back toward the counter, she caught another glance of the man in the suit. He was still sitting at the farthest table in the diner, his sharp, observant eyes watching the family as they gratefully devoured their meals. His fingers drummed thoughtfully against the table, his coffee untouched. There was something about him, something calculated yet oddly curious. Molly quickly turned her attention back to her work, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates, but she could feel his gaze following her movements. She wasn't used to that. Most customers barely noticed her. She was just a waitress, a tired, overworked single mom scraping by. But this man, he was paying attention, and that made her uneasy. The family's gratitude. Minutes later, as the family finished their meal, the mother wiped away a few stray tears before approaching the counter where Molly stood. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't know what this means to us." Molly shook her head, offering a gentle smile. "You don't have to thank me. Just pay it forward someday, if you can." The woman's eyes shone with gratitude. "We will," she promised. Her husband gave Molly a firm nod, his voice low but sincere. "You're a good person." Then, with one last grateful glance, they took their children by the hands and stepped out into the night. Molly exhaled, leaning against the counter. She felt good. Tired, but good. She had done the right thing. But just as she started clearing their table, a smooth voice spoke behind her. That was impressive. She jumped slightly and turned. The man in the suit was standing right there. Up close, he was even taller than she had expected, with piercing blue eyes and a crisp, tailored jacket that probably cost more than her entire month's rent. Molly forced a polite smile. "Oh, thanks." The man's lips curled into a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I couldn't help but overhear what you did for that family." Molly swallowed, suddenly self-conscious. "It was nothing," she muttered. "Just seemed like the right thing to do." The man tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Most people wouldn't have done that." Molly shrugged. "Well, most people should." For a moment, the man simply watched her, as if he were weighing something in his mind. Then he extended a hand. "James Bennett," he said smoothly. Molly hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was firm but warm. "Molly Carter." James' gaze didn't waver. "Molly Carter," he repeated, as if testing how the name sounded on his tongue. "Nice to meet you." Molly nodded, still not sure what to make of him. James gestured to a nearby booth. "May I sit?" She blinked. I guess. Why would a man like him want to sit and talk to her?" James slid into the booth, and Molly, after a brief hesitation, sat across from him. "I don't mean to pry," he began, folding his hands on the table. "But I couldn't help but notice. You didn't even think twice before helping that family." Molly let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "I did think twice," she admitted. "I thought about how I could barely afford it. But then I thought about those kids. And that made the choice easy." James nodded, seeming to take in every word. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. Molly frowned slightly. "Why?" James simply smiled. "Curiosity." Molly sighed. 3 years. "And before that?" She hesitated, not sure why she was answering his questions. "A little bit of everything," she finally said. "Retail. Office temp jobs. Just whatever I could find." James' gaze flickered to the counter where the diner's register sat, then back to her. "Do you like working here?" Molly let out a dry chuckle. "It pays the bills. Well, most of them." His expression turned thoughtful. "What if you had the chance to do something else? Something more stable?" Molly raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job?" James leaned back slightly, amusement glinting in his eyes. Not exactly. Molly crossed her arms, suddenly on edge. Then what exactly are you getting at, Mr. Bennett? James smiled slightly. Just James, please. He paused, then added, I help people. Molly's stomach twisted. Here it comes. The sales pitch, the scam, the let me change your life talk that always led to someone asking for money. She'd been fooled before. James must have sensed her hesitation, because he held up his hands. No tricks, he assured her. No scams. Just a conversation. Molly eyed him warily. About what? James leaned forward slightly. About why someone like you, someone with kindness, resilience, and an incredible work ethic, is stuck in a job where she barely makes ends meet. Molly stiffened. Because life isn't fair, she said simply. James studied her for a long moment. What if someone gave you an opportunity? He asked. Would you take it? Molly frowned, her heart pounding. What kind of opportunity? She asked cautiously. James hesitated, as if choosing his next words carefully. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. He set it on the table and slid it toward her. Molly stared at it. What is this? She asked. James smiled faintly. It's for you. Molly didn't move. Something about this felt too big. Too much. What's inside? She asked wearily. James nodded toward it. Open it. Molly hesitated, then slowly reached for the envelope. She peeled it open and froze. Inside was a check. A check for $10,000. Her breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred as she stared at the bold numbers, her mind unable to process what was happening. I don't understand, she stammered. James' voice was calm, steady. It's yours. Molly shook her head. No way. I can't take this. Yes, you can, James said simply. And you should. Tears burned behind her eyes as she gripped the check like it might disappear. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for me? James' smile softened. Because I believe in rewarding kindness. Molly couldn't breathe. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. A decision that could change everything. Molly sat frozen in the booth, her fingers tightening around the check like it might disappear if she blinked. $10,000. It felt unreal. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out the chatter of the other customers and the clinking of dishes behind the counter. Her breathing grew shallow as a dozen thoughts collided in her head. This had to be a trick, a prank, a scam. No one just handed out that kind of money, especially not to someone like her. She forced herself to meet James Bennett's calm, unwavering gaze. This doesn't make sense, she whispered. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. James folded his hands on the table, his expression unreadable. I know enough, he said simply. I watched you tonight. I saw the way you helped that family, even when you didn't have much to spare. You didn't hesitate. That tells me everything I need to know about you, Molly. She swallowed hard, gripping the check so tightly her knuckles turned white. But I can't take this, she stammered. I don't even know how to accept something like this. James tilted his head slightly. Why not? Molly blinked at him, stunned by the question. Because people don't just give out money like this, she said, not without expecting something in return. James exhaled slowly, like he had been expecting that response. I don't want anything from you, he assured her. No strings, no obligations. Think of it as an investment, not in a business, but in a person who deserves a break. Molly's chest tightened. A break. When was the last time she had one of those? When had life ever handed her anything but struggle after struggle? Her instinct was to refuse, to push the check back across the table and walk away. She had always figured things out on her own. That was just how life worked for people like her. But then she thought of Sophie, her 6-year-old daughter, with her bright eyes and endless curiosity, who deserved so much more than a mother who was always one missed paycheck away from disaster. This money could change everything. It could pay off the overdue bills stacked on her kitchen table. It could get Sophie into a better daycare. Maybe even help Molly take night classes, give her a chance at something more than dead-end jobs and endless exhaustion. The temptation was overwhelming, but so was the fear. What if it wasn't real? What if he changed his mind? What if she used it wrong? James seemed to sense her turmoil. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if trying to anchor her in the moment. "I get it," he said. "This feels like too much, like it's not meant for you." Molly nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "But I promise you," James continued, "you deserve good things, Molly. And you don't have to do everything alone." Molly swallowed hard, struggling to hold back the unexpected wave of emotion that crashed over her. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But people had let her down before. People like her ex-husband, who walked out the door and never came back. People who said they'd help but disappeared the moment things got hard. She had spent so long being disappointed that she had stopped expecting anything good at all. James sighed, as if sensing her hesitation. "Listen," he said, "you don't have to decide right now. Take the check. Think about it. Call me when you're ready." Molly hesitated. If she walked away now, would she regret it forever? Would she wake up tomorrow and wish she had taken the risk? Her fingers trembled as she slipped the check into her apron pocket. It felt dangerous just sitting there. James smiled, standing up and reaching into his jacket for something. A moment later, he slid a business card across the table. "If you ever want to talk," he said, "I'm just a phone call away." Molly stared at the card. His name was printed in bold, crisp letters. James Bennett. Bennett Capital and Investments. CEO and founder. Her stomach flipped. This man wasn't just anyone. He was someone important, someone powerful, and for some reason, he had chosen to help her. She looked up at him, her heart pounding. "I don't know what to say." James smiled. "You don't have to say anything." And then, with one last nod, he turned and walked toward the door. The diner's bell jingled as he stepped outside, disappearing into the crisp night air. Molly sat there, staring after him, feeling like the ground had just shifted beneath her feet. A sleepless night. When Molly got home that night, Sophie was already fast asleep, curled under a faded pink blanket. Molly lingered by her daughter's bed, brushing a soft curl away from her face. Then she reached into her pocket, pulling out the check and James' business card. She stared at them for what felt like forever. Her mind ran in circles. If she cashed the check, she could pay off the overdue bills. She could finally take Sophie out for a special day, ice cream, a movie, maybe even a toy she had been asking for. She could breathe for the first time in years. But then the doubts crept in. What if she wasted it? What if she made a mistake? She had never had this much money before, and somehow that made it even scarier. Molly sighed, pressing the check against her forehead. She was too tired to figure it out tonight. She placed the check inside the top drawer of her nightstand, safe, untouched, but waiting. And for the first time in a long time, as she climbed into bed, she let herself wonder, what if life really could change? A new day, a new possibility. The next morning, as Molly stood at the diner counter pouring coffee for customers, she couldn't shake the weight of the decision waiting for her. Lisa, her coworker and closest friend at the diner, caught her staring off into space. "What's up with you?" Lisa asked, nudging her. "You look like you just saw a ghost." Molly bit her lip. "Not a ghost," she muttered. "Just a life-altering opportunity." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious." Molly hesitated. She had never told anyone about her struggles, about how hard it was to make ends meet, about the nights she skipped dinner so Sophie could eat. But now she had $10,000 sitting in her nightstand and no idea what to do with it. So for the first time in years, she told someone the truth. Lisa listened, her eyes widening as Molly recounted the night before. When Molly finished, Lisa exhaled, shaking her head in disbelief. "Molly," she said, gripping her arm. "Do you know what this is?" Molly frowned. "What?" Lisa smiled. "This is your chance." Molly's stomach twisted. "And what if I screw it up?" Lisa squeezed her hand. "And what if you don't?" The words hit her hard. What if she didn't screw it up? What if she took this one good thing and made something out of it? Before she could overthink it, Molly reached into her pocket, pulled out James' business card, and turned it over in her fingers. Maybe it was time to make the call. The weight of a decision. Molly stood behind the diner's counter, gripping the edge with white-knuckled intensity. The check in her apron pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It had been almost 12 hours since James Bennett walked out that door, leaving her with a life-altering choice. The rational part of her brain screamed, "This is a gift. Use it." The fearful part whispered, "What if it's not real? What if this is some kind of test, and you fail?" She had never been given something without strings attached. And that's what scared her the most. A $10,000 mistake wasn't something she could afford. Lisa, still leaning against the counter, nudged her again. "You're seriously not going to call them?" Molly let out a frustrated sigh. "I don't know, Lisa. It's just too much. People like me don't get this kind of luck." Lisa scoffed. "You call working double shifts, raising a kid alone, and barely making rent luck? Honey, you've been due for some actual luck for years." Molly stared down at the counter, running a damp cloth over the surface in circles, not really cleaning anything. Lisa leaned in, lowering her voice. "What's really stopping you?" Molly hesitated. "Fear. Fear of hoping, only to have it ripped away. Fear of taking a risk, only to fall flat on her face. Fear of changing her life, because what if she failed again?" She had spent years building a wall of caution around herself. It had kept her from trusting people, from asking for help, from believing that her life could ever be more than just survival. And now someone was offering her a way out, and she didn't know how to take it. Lisa sighed. "Molly, if you don't take this chance, what's going to change? Be honest." Molly swallowed hard. Nothing. She would keep working at the diner, keep stretching her paychecks, keep wondering if Sophie would grow up thinking this was all life had to offer. Lisa crossed her arms. "Do you really want Sophie to see you struggle for the rest of your life when you might have a way out?" That hit hard. Because no, she didn't want her daughter to think that life was just a series of closed doors. She didn't want Sophie to inherit her fear. Molly exhaled shakily. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Lisa grinned. "You're gonna call them." Molly nodded slowly, her fingers wrapping around the business card in her pocket. "Not today. Maybe not even tomorrow. But soon." Because for the first time in forever, the idea of change didn't seem so terrifying anymore. The first call. That night, Molly sat at her kitchen table, staring at the business card. She had put Sophie to bed an hour ago, but sleep wasn't an option for her. The check was still in her nightstand drawer, untouched. The possibilities it carried buzzed in her brain like electricity. She traced James Bennett's name with her fingertip, debating. What if he didn't remember her? What if this was some elaborate prank? What if he was testing her, waiting for her to fail? Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the numbers for what felt like an eternity. Then, before she could second-guess herself again, she pressed call. It rang. Once. Twice. A third time. Then, a smooth, composed voice answered. James Bennett. Molly almost hung up, but she took a breath, forcing herself to speak. Hi, it's Molly. Molly Carter. There was a slight pause. Then, James' voice softened. Molly, he said, sounding genuinely pleased. I was hoping you'd call. She let out a shaky breath, gripping the edge of the table. I don't know where to start, she admitted. That's okay, James replied. We'll figure it out together. For the first time in years, Molly felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. The leap into the unknown. Molly sat at her kitchen table, the glow from the street lamp outside casting long shadows across the worn wooden surface. She could hear the rhythmic ticking of the clock, each second stretching out like an eternity, as she held the phone to her ear. James had just spoken, his voice calm, steady. I was hoping you'd call. Molly swallowed. The words had been simple, but they carried a strange weight, like he had already known she would. She cleared her throat, gripping the phone a little tighter. Sorry for calling so late. James chuckled lightly. It's never too late for a good conversation. Molly hesitated. What am I even supposed to say? This was completely uncharted territory. For years, every decision she had made had been based on survival. Paying the rent, making sure Sophie had food, getting to work on time. She had never made a decision that had the potential to change her life entirely. She took a slow breath. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. James was silent for a moment before responding. That's okay. The important part is that you're here, willing to consider something different. Molly glanced down at her hands, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug. I don't know how to accept help. I've never had anyone just give me something without expecting something back. James' voice softened. That's understandable. But let me ask you something. When you paid for that family's meal, did you expect something in return? Molly blinked. No, she murmured. I just couldn't let them go hungry. Exactly, James said. Sometimes the right thing to do is to help someone because you can. And right now, I can help you. Molly squeezed her eyes shut. It sounded so simple when he said it like that. But the voice in her head, the one that had learned to distrust good things, wasn't convinced. What if I mess this up? She whispered. James let out a thoughtful hum. What if you don't? That question hit her like a lightning bolt. She had spent so long assuming failure. She had never once considered success. Molly opened her eyes, staring down at the check she had pulled from her drawer. It was real. It was right there. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could take a step forward. She inhaled deeply, pressing the phone closer to her ear. Okay, she said. Let's talk. James sounded pleased. Great. How about we meet in person tomorrow? Same coffee shop as last time. Molly hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Okay. 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Perfect, James said. I'll see you then, Molly. As soon as the call ended, she stared at her phone like it might explode. She had just agreed to change her life. And she had no idea what came next. The meeting that could change everything. The next morning, Molly stood in front of the small bathroom mirror in her apartment, pulling her long brown hair into a neat ponytail. Sophie sat on the floor, coloring in one of her old books, her tiny legs swinging back and forth. Where are you going, Mommy? Sophie asked, her big brown eyes filled with curiosity. Molly hesitated. She had considered not telling Sophie about the meeting. If this didn't work out, she didn't want to give her daughter false hope. But Sophie was too smart. She always noticed things. I'm meeting a friend, Molly finally said, to talk about something important. Sophie's eyes lit up. Like a new job. Molly swallowed. Maybe, she admitted. Sophie grinned, holding up a crayon drawing of a smiling stick figure version of herself and Molly. You're the best mommy in the world, Sophie said matter-of-factly. You can do anything. Molly felt her throat tighten. She crouched down, pressing a soft kiss to Sophie's forehead. You think so? Sophie nodded vigorously. Yep. Molly exhaled, smiling despite the nervous energy rolling through her stomach. Well, let's hope you're right. By the time she arrived at the coffee shop, her palms were sweaty, and her heartbeat refused to slow down. James was already there, sitting at a corner table, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up the moment she walked in, offering a polite smile. Molly. She managed to return the smile as she slid into the chair across from him. Morning. James studied her, as if sensing her nerves. You don't have to be scared, he said gently. I'm not scared, she lied. He smirked. You're a terrible liar. Molly let out a small, nervous laugh, shaking her head. Fine. I'm terrified. James chuckled but didn't press the issue. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I did some research, he said, sliding the folder toward her. Molly blinked. On what? On opportunities, he explained. I wanted to see what options would best fit your skills, your experience, and your interests. Molly hesitated before flipping open the folder. Inside, she found printed brochures, course descriptions, and potential job training programs. One particular paper caught her eye. Small Business Management Course. Community College. She ran her fingers over the page, her mind racing. You said you love working in a diner, James said. Have you ever considered running one of your own? Molly's breath hitched. She had. She dreamed of it, but it always felt like a fantasy, something only other people got to do. I don't have the money, she said automatically. James raised an eyebrow. That's what the check is for. Molly let out a shaky breath. You really think I could do something like this? James leaned back in his chair, nodding. Absolutely. The certainty in his voice shook her to her core. No one had ever believed in her like this before. For the first time in her life, someone was pushing her forward instead of watching her struggle. And suddenly, she wanted to believe in herself too. Molly swallowed, staring at the papers in front of her. This was it. This was her chance. She could take the leap, or she could walk away and stay exactly where she had always been. Molly took a deep breath and looked James straight in the eye. I think I want to do this. James smiled. Good. He lifted his coffee cup in a silent toast. To new beginnings. Molly exhaled and clinked her cup against his. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was about to start living. Building a future she never thought possible. Molly sat at her kitchen table that night, staring at the papers spread out in front of her. The business course brochure sat right on top, the word Small Business Management bold and intimidating. She traced the title with her fingertips, her mind buzzing with 1,000 doubts and 1,000 dreams. Could she really do this? Was she actually about to take control of her life instead of just getting by? Sophie sat nearby, humming as she colored in her notebook. Every few seconds, she glanced up at Molly, her big brown eyes filled with curiosity. Mommy, why are you staring at your papers? She finally asked. Molly blinked, snapping out of her thoughts. Just thinking. Sophie tilted her head. Thinking about what? Molly exhaled. She had no idea how to explain this to a 6-year-old. How do you tell your child that you're trying to change everything? That for the first time in forever, you have hope. She hesitated, then said, About what comes next? Sophie grinned. Is it a fun next or a boring next? Molly let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. I guess we'll find out. Sophie nodded, satisfied with that answer, and went back to her drawing. But Molly couldn't shake the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She had spent years believing that she would never escape the cycle of paycheck-to-paycheck living, of working double shifts just to stay afloat, of always being one disaster away from losing everything. And now she was staring at an opportunity she never thought she'd have. But it came with fear too, because taking this path meant leaving behind the safety of what she knew, even if what she knew was hard. It meant taking risks, making choices that weren't just about getting through the day, but about building something lasting. Could she really do this? She glanced at Sophie, watching her little girl scribble away happily, safe and warm, without a single worry in the world. And in that moment, she knew. She had to try. For Sophie. For herself. for the life she had always dreamed of, but never believed she deserved. A step toward change. The next morning, Molly stood outside Springdale Community College, her heart pounding in her chest. The campus wasn't big, just a few modern buildings surrounded by well-kept lawns and benches. Students walked past, some rushing to class, others chatting in groups, clutching books and coffee cups. Molly clutched her folder tightly, her palms sweaty. She had spent years watching other people chase dreams like these while she worked double shifts at the diner, just trying to keep the lights on. And now she was one of them. It felt unreal. She stepped inside and made her way to the admissions office. A kind-looking woman behind the desk smiled as Molly approached. "Hi, how can I help you?" Molly swallowed her nerves. "I'd like to register for the small business management course," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and empowering at the same time. The woman nodded, pulling out some paperwork. "Great. Are you looking for a full-time or part-time schedule?" "Part-time," Molly said quickly. "I still need to work." "No problem at all," the woman said. "A lot of our students balance work and school. The classes are flexible." Molly exhaled, relief washing over her. Maybe she really could make this work. As she filled out the forms, a strange feeling settled in her chest. It was fear, yes, but it was also excitement. She was finally making a move toward something better. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of her own future. Unexpected support. Later that evening, Molly sat at the diner counter during her break, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of coffee. Lisa plopped down beside her, sipping on a milkshake. "All right, spill it." Molly glanced at her. "Spill what?" Lisa gave her a pointed look. "I know that face. That's a something big just happened, but I'm too scared to talk about it face." Molly sighed, setting down her spoon. "I signed up for the business course at the college." Lisa's eyes widened. "You what?" Molly hesitated. "I'm going to try and learn how to run a business." Lisa grinned so wide it nearly split her face in half. "Molly, that's amazing," she practically shouted, making a couple of customers glance their way. Molly cringed. "Keep your voice down." Lisa waved her off. "Screw that. This is huge. You're actually doing it." Molly bit her lip. "Yeah, I guess I am." Lisa smirked. "And let me guess, this wouldn't have happened if not for Mr. Mysterious Suit Guy." Molly groaned. "James." Lisa wiggled her eyebrows. "Ah, so we're on a first-name basis now." Molly rolled her eyes. "It's not like that." Lisa leaned in. "You sure? Because the way he looked at you that night, that was not just some random act of kindness look." Molly shook her head. "He's just helping. That's all." Lisa gave her a knowing look but didn't push. Instead, she nudged Molly's shoulder playfully. "Well, whether it's romance or just life-changing generosity, I think you should take the win, girl." Molly couldn't argue with that. The first class. A week later, Molly walked into her first business class, her heart pounding. She took a seat near the back, feeling completely out of place. Most of the students were younger, fresh out of high school. She felt old. But as the professor started talking about how to manage costs, build a business plan, and create something sustainable, something in her clicked. She wasn't just here to pass time. She was here to learn, to grow, to build something for her and Sophie. As the class went on, Molly took pages and pages of notes, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, she really could do this. When the class ended, she stepped outside, feeling lighter than she had in years. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. "James, how did the first class go?" Molly stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "Molly, it was amazing. Scary, but amazing." A few seconds later, another message popped up. "James, I had a feeling you'd love it. You're going to do great, Molly." Molly smiled. For the first time in forever, she wasn't just surviving. She was becoming someone new. Someone who could build a future she had never dared to dream of before. And that was worth every risk. The woman she was meant to be. Molly stood in front of the mirror, staring at herself. For the first time in years, she didn't see just a waitress, just a struggling single mom, just someone barely scraping by. She saw a woman who was changing her life. It had been 3 months since she started the business course. 3 months since James had handed her that check and given her the chance she never thought she'd have. 3 months since she stopped thinking, "I can't," and started thinking, "I can." It wasn't easy. Balancing classes, work, and raising Sophie meant long nights, early mornings, and more exhaustion than she thought possible. But every time she wanted to quit, she thought about the future she was building. For herself. For her daughter. For the version of herself she had always been afraid to reach for. She smoothed down her simple navy blue blouse, checked her reflection one last time, and grabbed her notebook. Today was the day. An unexpected business proposal. Molly walked into the diner with a new kind of confidence in her step. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a businesswoman in the making. Lisa was wiping down the counter when Molly walked in, raising an eyebrow. "All right, something's up. You've got that 'I have big news, but I'm scared to say it out loud' face." Molly chuckled. "I do not." Lisa smirked. "Oh, you definitely do." Molly took a deep breath, gripping her notebook. "I've been working on something," she said, "and I think it might actually be possible." Lisa leaned in. "Okay, now I'm intrigued. Spill." Molly pulled out a carefully drafted business plan, sliding it across the counter. Lisa picked it up, flipping through the pages. After a few moments, her eyes widened. "Molly, is this what I think it is?" Molly nodded, heart pounding. "I want to open my own cafe." Lisa nearly dropped the papers. "What?" "I've been learning everything, how to manage costs, how to apply for business loans, how to market a place, and I've been saving up. Not just from the check James gave me, but from tips, extra shifts, every spare dollar I could." Lisa stared at her, completely speechless. "Molly," she finally said, in awe, "this is real." Molly nodded, her throat tight. "It could be." Lisa grinned. "Where's James in all of this? Has he seen this?" Molly exhaled, hesitating. "No, not yet." Lisa gave her a look. "Why not?" Molly bit her lip. "Because I want to do this on my own." Lisa shook her head, laughing. "Girl, you are something else. But you know what? I believe in you." Molly smiled. "That makes 2 of us." The conversation that changed everything. Later that evening, Molly sat across from James in their usual coffee shop, tapping her fingers against the notebook in her lap. She had called him earlier, asking to meet. Now she was staring at him, heart racing, knowing that this conversation could change everything. James tilted his head. "All right, Molly. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath and slid the business plan across the table. James raised an eyebrow, flipping through it. He didn't rush. He took his time, reading every detail, every number, every goal. After what felt like an eternity, he finally looked up. His expression was unreadable. Molly swallowed hard. "I want to open my own cafe," she said. "I have a plan. I've been saving up. And I just wanted to show you." James leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "You've been working on this by yourself." She nodded. "I didn't want to ask for help until I knew I could do it on my own." Something flickered in James' eyes. "Molly, this is incredible." Her breath hitched. "It is." He chuckled. "Of course it is. It's well thought out, detailed, realistic, and I can tell you put your heart into it." Molly's shoulders sagged in relief. James studied her for a moment before speaking again. "But there's one thing you need to understand." Molly tensed. "What?" James leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. You don't have to do everything alone. Molly blinked, caught off guard. James continued. I know you've spent your whole life doing things by yourself, because you had to. But this is a business. You need connections, support, a team. Molly hesitated. But I don't want charity. James smiled. Then don't think of it as charity. Think of it as a partnership. Molly's heart skipped a beat. A partnership. James nodded. I invest in businesses all the time, Molly. And I know a good idea when I see one. Molly couldn't breathe. You'd invest in me? James smiled. Molly, I already did. The first time I saw you help that family. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just about money. This was about someone believing in her, really, truly believing. For the first time in her life, Molly didn't feel like a struggling waitress, a single mom, someone barely scraping by. She felt like a businesswoman, like a founder, like a woman who was about to change her own damn life. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet James' gaze. I don't want a handout, she said, voice shaking. James nodded. Good, because I'm not offering one. Molly took a deep breath. And then, finally, she smiled. Okay, she said. Let's do this. James extended a hand. To new beginnings. Molly gripped his hand firmly. To new beginnings. And just like that, her future began. Epilogue. 1 year later. The sign outside the cafe read, Sophie's Place. Coffee and community. Molly stood behind the counter, steaming a fresh cup of coffee, watching her dream come to life. Customers filled the small but cozy space, chatting over pastries and lattes. Lisa bustled around with a notepad, grinning at Molly. I still can't believe you did this. Molly laughed. Me neither. James sat at a table near the window, giving her a small, proud nod. Molly exhaled, looking around. She had gone from barely making ends meet to owning a thriving cafe. She had gone from hoping for better days to creating them herself. And most importantly, she had proven, to herself, to Sophie, and to the world, that she was strong enough, smart enough, and brave enough to build something incredible. Molly smiled. This was only the beginning. A dream becomes reality. Molly stared at James, his words still echoing in her mind. A partnership. Not charity. Not a handout. An investment. In her. She had never been anyone's first choice before. She had been the girl who was left behind. The woman who worked herself to exhaustion just to keep the lights on. The mother who skipped meals so her daughter wouldn't have to. And now here was James Bennett, a man who built empires, telling her that she was worth investing in. That she was capable. That she could build something real. Molly swallowed the lump in her throat, her hands trembling slightly as she rested them on the business plan in front of her. This is really happening, isn't it? She whispered. James smiled. If you wanted to. Molly took a deep breath. And then she nodded. All right, she said, her voice stronger now. Let's do this. The first steps toward a new life. The following weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of preparation, learning, and risk-taking. James introduced her to investors, suppliers, and real estate agents, walking her through every step of the business world. She secured a location, a small but charming shop on Main Street, just 2 blocks from the diner where her story had started. Lisa practically cried with excitement when she saw it for the first time. Oh my God, Molly, she breathed, stepping inside. This is yours. Molly ran her fingers over the polished wooden counter, her dream finally feeling real beneath her fingertips. She could already picture the cozy booths, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air, the laughter of customers. This is happening, she whispered. Lisa grinned. Damn right it is. And when the renovations began, Molly was right there, hands covered in paint, sleeves rolled up, working side by side with the people she had once thought were out of her league. James checked in constantly, but he never took control. "This is your vision, Molly," he reminded her. "I'm just here to make sure you get to see it through." And for the first time in her entire life, Molly truly believed that she was meant for more. Opening day. 1 year after that fateful night in the diner, Molly stood outside her very own cafe, the grand opening banner fluttering in the morning breeze. Sophie's Place, Coffee and Community. Named after the little girl who had never stopped believing in her. Molly took a deep breath, overwhelmed with emotion. This was it. She had built this. With her own hands, her own sweat, her own courage. No more just getting by. She was thriving. Lisa stood beside her, nudging her with a grin. "Ready?" Molly smiled, squeezing Sophie's small hand. "Ready." As she unlocked the doors, a rush of customers filled the cafe. Friends, neighbors, even some strangers drawn in by the warm atmosphere and the smell of fresh pastries. Lisa got to work taking orders, laughing as she struggled with the new register. "Molly, what's the button for extra foam? This thing is trying to fight me." Molly laughed, rolling up her sleeves. "Move over, rookie. Let me show you how it's done." She slid behind the counter with a confidence she had never known before, taking orders, pouring coffee, greeting every single customer with a warm smile. And then she saw him. James sat at a table by the window, a cup of coffee in front of him, watching her with that same calm, knowing smile. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Molly knew. She had made it. She walked over to him, sliding into the seat across from him, wiping a bit of flour from her apron. "Well," she asked playfully, "what do you think?" James took a slow sip of his coffee, then set the cup down. "I think," he said, smiling, "that I made a damn good investment." Molly chuckled, shaking her head. "You know," she mused, looking around at the cafe filled with laughter, warmth, and hope. "For the first time in my life, I actually believe that." James tilted his head. "That you're worth investing in." Molly met his gaze, her heart light, her future finally her own. "Yes." James raised his coffee cup in a silent toast. "To new beginnings," he said softly. Molly clinked her cup against his. "To new beginnings," she agreed. And as she looked around at everything she had built, everything she had fought for, everything that was still to come, she smiled. Because this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning.